The sun had barely crested the tree line when Officer Daniel Reyes sat alone in his patrol car for the first time. The stillness of suburban morning buzzed with low tension he couldn't quite shake. Birds chirped overhead, and the sleepy neighborhood was waking up slowly. Coffee pots gurgling behind closed doors, school buses humming in the distance. But inside Daniel, nerves rattled louder than any engine. His hands were locked at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, knuckles slightly pale from pressure. The crisp blue of his new uniform still felt stiff against his skin, and the weight of the badge on his chest was heavier than he expected. He replayed the final words of his training officer, Sergeant Coleman, like a mantra. Be alert, be respectful, but never soft. That line had echoed through the academy and stuck with Daniel like a permanent fixture. Now it was just him, a loaded belt at his hip, and a quiet suburban town he didn't know well. Every car he passed became a potential threat. Every pedestrian was a possible suspect. It was the way he'd been trained, not to be paranoid, but to be prepared. At headquarters that morning, the watch commander had briefed all officers about a string of petty theft around the clinic district. Car break-ins, suspicious loitering, and one report of stolen bicycle. Keep your eyes open around the medical plaza, he'd said, pointing to the spot on the map with his baton. No violation is too small. That's how you catch the big ones, starting with the little things. So Daniel had parked along Maple Avenue for a while, watching traffic and mentally rehearsing his protocol for stops. His fingers danced nervously over his notepad. He checked and rechecked his radio. He ran through what to say during a pullover, how to approach, how far to stand from the window, what angle to keep his hand at. Then he saw it. A silver Toyota sedan cruised through the intersection with its right tail light flickering dimly, a barely functioning signal that would have gone unnoticed by most. But Daniel noticed. His adrenaline surged like a tidal wave. He clicked his blinker, pulled out, and began tailing the car, heart pounding in sync with the patrol vehicle's soft rumble. He flipped on his lights. The Toyota eased to the curb in front of a quiet medical building. Carter Family Clinic, according to the sign. The driver remained calm, hands visible on the wheel. No sudden movements. No hesitation. Daniel approached cautiously. His right hand hovered near his holster, not drawing, but ready. He took in the car quickly. Spotless interior, no visible contraband, registration sticker up to date. The man in the driver's seat wore a white coat, his ID badge still clipped to the pocket. He looked calm, not confrontational. His eyes met Daniel's as he rolled the window down, a mixture of curiosity and something else. Something quieter, harder to read. "Good morning, officer," the man said, voice steady, tone neutral. Daniel cleared his throat. "Morning, sir. License and registration, please." The man nodded politely and handed them over without comment. His name read Dr. Elijah Carter, a physician, local, no outstanding warrants, no infractions on file. Daniel ran it all through his dash computer while still keeping a careful eye on the car. Everything came back clean. Still, protocol was protocol. You're aware your right taillight is dim? Daniel asked when he returned. Elijah glanced at the back of the car in the side mirror, then back at Daniel. "I wasn't, but thanks for pointing it out. I'll have it looked at." Daniel hesitated. This wasn't how he imagined his first stop would go. No argument, no attitude, no reason to escalate. Yet part of him felt he had to do more. He'd been told to watch the area. He'd been told that criminals often hide behind professionalism. One officer even joked, "The ones in lab coats can surprise you." So Daniel asked, "You work here?" "I own the clinic," Elijah replied, gesturing casually at the building. "We've been serving the neighborhood for over 10 years. There was no arrogance in his tone, just fact. But Daniel's insecurities flared. This man seemed in control, comfortable, confident. Everything Daniel wasn't in that moment. The balance of power felt unsteady. "Would you mind stepping out of the vehicle, sir?" Elijah blinked, surprised. "Is there a reason?" Daniel faltered for a half second. Just a routine check. Nothing personal. The doctor looked at him for a moment, longer than Daniel expected. It wasn't fear or defiance in Elijah's expression. It was disappointment. Quiet, burning disappointment. He stepped out slowly, his every movement deliberate. "I prefer if we kept this on the sidewalk. My patients are beginning to arrive." Daniel nodded stiffly. He knew eyes were watching from behind the clinic windows. A mother leading her child to the front door paused. A jogger slowed across the street. A man walking his dog tilted his head curiously. The moment stretched longer than it should have. Daniel could feel the heat of judgment, though no one said a word. He glanced at Elijah's badge again. Dr. Elijah Carter, M.D., Chief Medical Officer. The man wasn't just a doctor. He was the doctor here. He was the reason this community had care at all. And suddenly, Daniel felt small, untrained, out of place. The voice in his head, the sergeant's, was starting to fade. A new voice, his own, was rising. "I appreciate your cooperation," Daniel finally said. "I'll just issue a warning for the light. Please get it fixed when you can." Elijah nodded slowly. "Thank you, officer. I will." Daniel handed back the license and stepped away. But something lingered in the air, something unspoken. It wasn't hostility. It was reflection. A mirror had been held up to him. And for the first time, Daniel wasn't sure what he saw in it. He returned his cruiser and sat behind the wheel. The engine purred, ready to move on. But Daniel didn't. Not yet. He looked back at the clinic, watched Elijah greet his patients with ease, with grace. That stop was supposed to be routine. It wasn't. It would stay with him longer than he could have imagined. Elijah Carter had barely finished examining his third patient of the morning when his receptionist, Denise, knocked on the door with a quick rap. "Doc," she said, poking her head in. "Delivery guy just called. Said he's outside, but couldn't find the clinic entrance." Elijah nodded, peeling off his gloves. "Thanks, Denise. I'll go out and meet him." He washed his hands quickly, dried them with a towel tucked under the sink, and grabbed his phone from the counter. His ID badge still sat on his desk, forgotten in the rush between patients. But he didn't think much of it. He was wearing his white coat, and he was only stepping out for a moment. The sun had fully risen now, casting a golden light across the quiet street as he exited through the side door. Outside, the neighborhood hummed with its usual rhythm. Elijah walked to the edge of the clinic's modest parking lot, glancing down the road to spot the delivery driver. As he reached the curb near his silver Toyota, he tapped his phone and redialed the number that had just called him. "Hey," he said when the call picked up, "I'm right outside by the clinic's east entrance, near a silver sedan. Do you see me?" The driver responded affirmatively, saying he'd be pulling up in less than a minute. Elijah waited, phone still in hand, glancing at the schedule app to review his next appointment, while the sun warmed the back of his neck. That was when he heard it, the low hum of a police engine approaching from behind. Then the distinctive pop of the cruiser's door swinging open. 2 officers stepped out, both white, both tall, both wearing mirrored sunglasses that reflected the world in cold blue distortions. Elijah looked up casually, assuming they were passing through or maybe stopping in to ask about the recent break-ins. But they weren't walking toward the building. They were walking toward him. "Sir," one of them called out, his tone sharp and clipped. "Can we speak with you for a moment?" Elijah lowered his phone. "Sure. Something wrong. Officers." They exchanged a quick look. The second officer, slightly older with a firm jaw and a rigid stance, spoke next. "We receive a call about suspicious activity in this area. You matched the description given." Elijah blinked, slightly taken aback. "Suspicious activity? I think you may be mistaken. I'm just waiting for a delivery outside my clinic." "You work here?" the younger officer asked, folding his arms. "I own the clinic," Elijah replied, calm and measured. "Dr. Elijah Carter. I've been here over a decade. If you like, I can show you. Do you have identification?" The older one cut in. Elijah gestured back toward the door. Inside, I just stepped out to receive a package. My receptionist can confirm. We need to see some ID now, the younger officer interrupted, stepping closer. Something in their posture had shifted. It wasn't inquiry anymore. It was suspicion, tension, the kind that crept under skin like a slow itch. Elijah's instincts, sharpened over years of quiet racism wrapped in politeness, kicked in. He lifted both hands slowly in a non-threatening gesture. My badge is just inside. I'd be happy to retrieve it if you'd like to accompany me in. Why didn't you bring out with you? The older officer snapped. I wasn't expecting to be stopped, Elijah replied, his voice still composed. As I said, I'm just waiting on a delivery. You match a description, the younger officer repeated. Black male, mid-40s, white coat, seen loitering near parked vehicles. You fit that to AT. Elijah couldn't help but huff a quiet, stunned laugh at the absurdity. Loitering? I'm standing next to my own car, in front of my clinic, wearing a white coat. That was when the shift became palpable. The older officer's hand dropped near his belt, not drawing, but hovering, resting lightly on his taser. We're going to need you to place your hands on the vehicle, he said. Elijah's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. With respect, that's not necessary. If you check the building, my name is on the sign. I can retrieve my ID. There's no need. You're being uncooperative, the younger officer snapped. No, I'm explaining. Sir, place your hands on the vehicle. Now. Behind them, the delivery van pulled into view and parked awkwardly across the lot. The driver stepped out slowly, confusion on his face as he watched the scene unfold. Denise opened the side door, noticed the tension, and froze. Everything okay, Dr. Carter? She called nervously. He's fine. The younger officer snapped back before Elijah could answer. Elijah's calm started to wear thin, not out of fear, but out of exhaustion, out of the familiarity of moments like these, of being doubted, questioned, stripped of dignity before being heard. I am not resisting, he said evenly. I am simply asserting my rights. There is no reason to treat me like a suspect. I will retrieve my ID, and if you allow my staff to confirm my identity, turn around and place your hands on the vehicle, the older officer barked. This is your last warning. A small crowd had started to gather now. Patient from the clinic, a mother holding a child, the delivery driver clutching a box awkwardly between his hands. Elijah looked at them, then at the officers. Everything you're doing right now, he said quietly, is on camera. There are security feeds all around this clinic. I advise you to reconsider what you're escalating. The words landed with a different kind of authority, not defiance, not disrespect, just truth, cold and clear. The officers hesitated. The older one narrowed his eyes. You threatening us, Doc? No, Elijah replied. I'm reminding you that I have rights, and that accountability works both ways. Another beat of silence passed. The younger officer glanced toward the clinic's door, where Denise now stood with Elijah's ID badge in her hand. This is Dr. Carter, she said firmly, her voice shaking but loud. He owns this building. This is his car. You're harassing him. The spell broke. The older officer's hand dropped from his belt. The younger one adjusted his stance. There was no apology, just an awkward shifting of posture, a clearing of throats. We were just responding to a call, the older one muttered. And now you've confirmed who I am, Elijah said, taking his badge and sliding it back onto his coat. Was that so difficult? The officers gave him curt nods, turned back to their cruiser, and drove off without another word. Elijah stood for a long moment in the silence they left behind. Not angry, not afraid, just tired. Denise walked over and handed him the package the delivery driver had placed by the steps. You okay, Doc? She asked softly. He nodded. I'm fine. Let's just get back to work. But something had shifted that morning, not just in him, but in the people watching, in the patients who'd seen their trusted doctor treated like a threat, in the delivery driver who hadn't known what to say, in the receptionist who'd found her voice when it mattered most, and in a patrol car parked a block away. Officer Daniel Reyes sat frozen, having witnessed the entire exchange from a distance. He hadn't known it was Dr. Carter when he saw the officers confront him, but as it unfolded, something in Daniels got twisted, hard and unforgiving, because he knew he should have stepped in. The moment was heavy with disbelief. Elijah stood firm, his breast steady, but his eyes scanning for any sign of de-escalation. The officers flanked him, their voices growing sharper, their stance more squared. "We're asking you again, what are you doing here?" one of them repeated, even though Elijah had already answered twice. His delivery order sat untouched on the hood of his car, beads of condensation collecting on the plastic bag. It was a small, almost absurd detail in the midst of mounting hostility. From across the street, a curious bystander stopped mid-step, eyebrows raised. Then another, a woman walking her dog, paused, pulling out her phone. Slowly, like ripples widening from a stone dropped into still water, people began gathering. A middle-aged man in scrubs from the pharmacy next door stepped out, sensing the tension in the air. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, carefully neutral. No answer came. Inside the clinic, a young nurse peeked out from the front desk window. Her name was Tiana, fresh out of nursing school, and she'd known Dr. Carter as both mentor and friend. When she saw him outside, surrounded by officers, her heart skipped. She ran to the front door and swung it open. "Hey, that's Dr. Carter," she shouted. "He owns this place." One of the officers turned toward her. "Ma'am, step back inside. This is a police matter." "No, you step back," Tiana said, coming closer. "You're harassing my boss." "Ma'am, I said step back." But by now the bystanders had become a small crowd. Phones were raised. Whispers floated between them. "Is that the doctor from the clinic? What's going on? Why are they hassling him?" Someone from the back shouted, "He's a doctor. I've seen him here for years." Still, the officers didn't budge. One of them rested a hand on his holster. Elijah noticed the movement, but didn't flinch. He kept his voice level, resisting the deep primal urge to yell. "I've told you who I am. If you have further questions, we can walk inside, and I'll show you my office, my credentials, whatever you need." The taller officer scoffed. "You expect us to just take your word for it? You don't have any ID on you." "I stepped out for delivery. My wallet's inside." Elijah replied. The second officer cut in, "Or maybe you're buying time. You could have just come from somewhere else. This is a high theft area." Elijah's eyes narrowed. "This is a healthcare clinic. I've been treating patients all morning. Ask anyone here." But the officers weren't listening. Their posture grew stiffer as more people started speaking up. "He took care of my daughter last week," someone yelled. "This is ridiculous." And yet, the more people came to Elijah's defense, the more defensive the officers became. Their control of the situation felt like it was slipping, and instead of adjusting, they doubled down. "Sir, I'm going to need you to put your hands where I can see them," one officer said, stepping closer. "I'm not a threat," Elijah said firmly, but he complied, slowly raising his hands to shoulder level. A teenage boy near the front of the crowd whispered to his friend, "They're really going to cuff him?" Cameras zoomed in. One live streamed the scene. Comments began to pour in online, outraged, stunned, furious. Back inside the clinic, another staffer, Lena, the receptionist, picked up the phone and called the city office. "We need someone from the mayor's office or someone important," she said, trying to stay calm. "The police are harassing Dr. Carter. Outside, right now." Meanwhile, one of the older patients who'd come for a blood pressure check shuffled out the front door with the help of a walker. He was in his 80s, wore thick glasses, and had known Elijah for years. "What's this nonsense?" he croaked, his voice trembling but sharp. "That man saved my life. You treating him like a criminal?" The officer nearest him didn't respond. His focus remained locked on Elijah, whose hands were still up, his face calm but edged with frustration. "This doesn't have to escalate," Elijah said softly. "You've got a whole community here telling you who I am. Look at their faces. Does this look like a man who's trespassing?" But suspicion, once ignited, is hard to extinguish. The officers exchanged a glance, debating whether to detain him. The younger one muttered, "We'll run his plates." They walked to the back of Elijah's car. One tapped on the patrol laptop inside the cruiser. A moment passed. Then another. The results returned, registered to Elijah Carter. The address matched the clinic. Silence. The officer stared at the screen. For a second, his expression flickered. Something like doubt, maybe even embarrassment. He turned to his partner, who gave a stiff nod. But rather than apologize or de-escalate with grace, they pivoted. "We had to check. You matched the description," one of them said, their voice suddenly less firm. "It's protocol." "Protocol doesn't erase profiling," Elijah said. "You approached me because of my skin, not because of my behavior." From the crowd, someone clapped. Then another. A few others joined in a soft, slow rhythm of solidarity. It wasn't just applause, it was a statement. The officers exchanged another look, then without a word, turned and walked back to their vehicle. The engine started. The crowd parted as the cruiser slowly reversed, then drove off, the blue and red lights off now. The tension left behind in the dust. Elijah lowered his hands. Tiana rushed forward, grabbing his arm. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said quietly, but the tremble in his voice betrayed him. "Just tired." The crowd began to dissipate, murmurs trailing off as people returned to their routines. But their eyes stayed on Elijah, on the injustice they had just witnessed. They wouldn't forget. Inside the clinic, Lena met his eyes. "I called someone," she said. "City office. I don't know who will respond, but someone needed to know." Elijah gave her a faint nod. "Thank you." He stepped back inside, the cool air of the clinic washing over him like a curtain drawn between two acts. Whatever came next, the stage was now set. And the cameras? They were still rolling. The air felt thick with anticipation, a silent war between dignity and suspicion playing out in full view. Elijah stood his ground, his calm gaze unwavering despite the hostile energy. The nurse had just spoken up, her voice still echoing in the air, and yet the officers didn't budge. One's hand hovered near his holster. The other's grip tightened around his radio. The crowd pressed closer, phones recording, faces anxious. A few more community members gathered. An elderly woman from the corner store, a father holding his toddler's hand. Each of them witnesses to a moment that felt like it could go either way. Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't move an inch. But then he said it, slowly, clearly, deliberately. "I trained both of your commanding officers at the trauma center downtown. You want to call them?" The words didn't come out with anger. They came out with weight. Everything paused. Like someone hit a mute button on the world. The officer closest to Elijah blinked, his entire posture shifting in less than a second. His partner looked confused, uncertain whether to double down or pull back. In that strange silence, the sound of a car passing in the distance felt loud. One of the bystanders whispered, "Wait, did he say train their bosses?" The senior officer, the one who had kept his distance until now, finally reacted. He lowered his radio, hesitated, then spoke into it. "Unit 213 requesting verification. Possible ID match for subject. Claims affiliation with trauma center downtown. Says he trained command." There was no sarcasm in his voice now, just a trace of something that sounded like doubt, maybe even embarrassment. As they waited, Elijah turned slightly to the nurse standing a few feet away. "Please call inside and ask them to fax over my credentials to the department. They should have the number." She nodded and rushed back inside. The younger officer, now noticeably less confident, stepped back from Elijah's vehicle. His body language no longer shouted authority. It whispered confusion. "Sir," he said quietly, "if you are who you say you are, we apologize for any misunderstanding." "I don't need an apology," Elijah replied. "I need accountability. And I need it now, not after something terrible happens." The radio crackled back to life. A firm voice came through. 213. We confirm Dr. Elijah Carter is the medical director at County Trauma. Serve as lead instructor on advanced field medicine training for command unit leaders. Stand down immediately. The words hit like a gavel slamming in a courtroom. The senior officer stiffened, then approached Elijah slowly. "Sir, you understand the situation was..." He struggled to find words. It was based on a report. Elijah cut him off with quiet firmness. It was based on a perception shaped by race, by prejudice, by fear, not by fact. A hush fell over the crowd again. Someone on the sidelines whispered, "He's right." Another person said, "They messed up." Inside the clinic, the receptionist had stepped outside, now holding the fax copy of Elijah's credentials. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze as she handed it to the officer. He didn't need to read it. His face already told the story. Red with shame, his jaw tightened, and he gave a small nod, unable to meet Elijah's eyes. But Elijah wasn't done. "Not yet. You stopped me for standing outside my own clinic, wearing my white coat, waiting for a package. You ignored the people who vouched for me. You escalated because you didn't see a doctor. You saw a black man." No one dared to speak. Even the radios on their belts stayed silent now. "I've treated gunshot victims in alleys. I've worked 72-hour shifts, saving lives after car pileups. I've patched up officers in this very city after shootouts. I don't expect you to know that, but I do expect you to listen when people speak. And to use your judgment with the same precision I use my scalpel, because a mistake on either end can cost a life." The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in respectful, stunned silence. And then came the claps, slow, intentional, from the older woman on the corner. Then another, and another. The applause grew, but it wasn't joyful. It was solemn, a recognition of a man who just offended his dignity without raising his voice. The officers didn't linger. They backed away quietly, returned to their cruiser, and drove off, leaving behind the weight of their failure and a community that had just witnessed something unforgettable. Elijah stood there for a moment longer, collecting himself. His heart was racing now, but his face never showed it. He turned to the crowd and nodded. "Let's get back to work," he said. "People still need care." The crowd slowly dispersed, conversations breaking out in hushed tones. The nurse walked back beside him. That was powerful. "It shouldn't have had to be," Elijah replied softly. "But thank you." Inside the clinic, the routine resumed, but something was different. Staff moved with a renewed sense of pride. Patients looked at Elijah not just as a doctor, but as a leader who had just taught a lesson without lifting a finger. Later that day, one of the younger nurses approached him. "Dr. Carter, you didn't even flinch out there. How did you stay so calm?" He looked at her, weary but resolved. "Because if I don't, who will?" And with that, Elijah returned his rounds, white coat flowing, stethoscope ready, not just a healer of bodies, but a quiet warrior for justice. The police cruiser was barely out of sight when the emotions finally spilled over. The crowd didn't just walk away. They lingered, surrounding Elijah with a mixture of anger, concern, admiration, and disbelief. Some were shaking their heads, visibly furious. "That could have gone so differently," a man muttered. A mother holding her toddler close wiped away tears. "I thought they were going to hurt you," she whispered. Others just stood in stunned silence, taking in what they had witnessed. An entire encounter turned around by truth, presence, and a name that finally demanded respect. Elijah didn't say much. He thanked the crowd gently, urging everyone to stay calm, to focus on what mattered. We showed them who we are. That's enough for now. But behind his steady voice, the tension in his shoulders lingered. He knew this wasn't the end. It never really was. Inside the clinic, the rhythm resumed, but something intangible had changed. Patients who had seen it all unfold greeted Elijah with quiet nods or soft thank yous. One elderly woman with a wrapped ankle reached for his hand and whispered, "My grandson wants to be a doctor. You just showed him how to stand tall." Elijah smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. The moment was too heavy for joy. He moved from room to room, checking on patients like nothing had happened. Blood pressure readings, wound dressings, follow-up instructions. It all carried on, but between every heartbeat, Elijah felt the weight of the encounter settling in. Not just what had happened, but what always happened. The doubt, the assumption, the split-second decisions based on skin before credentials. He wasn't new to it. No black professional was. By late afternoon, the phones in the clinic began ringing off rhythm. Not patients this time. Reporters, media outlets, radio stations. The video was already circulating online. Someone had recorded the whole incident and uploaded it to social media. In less than 3 hours, it had over 200,000 views. Doctor calmly dismantles racial profiling with one sentence. The headline read on a local news site. Comments poured in, some applauding Elijah's composure, others outraged at the police behavior. Journalists wanted quotes. TV crews wanted interviews. Activists wanted to organize around his name. Elijah, however, remained still. He declined every interview. "No statements right now," he told the receptionist. "I need to focus on the people here. That's what matters." His staff gathered quietly in the break room during the last patient lull of the day. They didn't talk much at first. Everyone just processed in silence. Finally, Darnell, the young lab technician, broke the stillness. "Doc, you really shook them up." Elijah looked up from his coffee. "That wasn't the goal." "I know," Darnell replied, "but they needed it." Elijah took a breath, rubbed his temples. "You know what's sad? This happens all the time. Not always as visible, not always with police. But every black doctor, lawyer, professor, we've all got stories. Getting questioned, disbelieved, having to prove who we are over and over. It's exhausting." Fatima, the nurse who'd spoken up earlier, nodded slowly. "It's like our presence is a threat until proven otherwise." "That's exactly it," Elijah said. "We walk into rooms and people see doubt before they see our degrees. Credentials don't erase bias. I was wearing a white coat, standing outside my own clinic, and it still wasn't enough." The break room felt quiet again. Everyone understood. Even those who weren't black felt the ripple of what had happened. The fear, the possibility of what could have gone wrong, and the dignity with which Elijah had met it. "I wasn't trying to win anything," Elijah added. "It wasn't about pride. It was about being seen, being respected. For once, I wanted them to feel that shift, to realize they were wrong. Not because I shouted them down, but because the truth stood taller than their assumptions." He sipped his coffee and added, "And I wanted the kids watching from the sidewalk to see that, too. That you can stand your ground without raising your voice. That you can demand dignity without losing yourself." Someone tapped gently on the door. It was a receptionist, holding up her phone. "Sir, Channel 5 just aired the footage. You might want to see it." Elijah hesitated, then followed her to the front desk. On the small screen, the news anchor narrated the now viral moment. The video showed Elijah's calm stance, the officer's reactions, and the voiceover quoted his exact words. "I trained both of your commanding officers." The anchor added that the police department issued a brief statement acknowledging a miscommunication and promising an internal review. Elijah sighed. "A miscommunication," he repeated, his voice low. "That's what they're calling it." He turned away from the screen. He didn't need to see any more. That night, as the clinic emptied and the city outside dimmed into twilight, Elijah stayed behind, alone in his office. He stared at the old photo on his desk, his graduation day from med school. His parents stood on either side of him, beaming with pride. He remembered their words clearly. "You don't just represent yourself. You represent every dream that came before you." That responsibility had never left him. He picked up his phone, not to check the news, but to text his father. "Had a rough day, but I stayed calm. You always said to lead with your presence." "I tried." His father responded minutes later. "You didn't try, son. You led. We're proud of you. The world saw you, and they won't forget it." Elijah stared at the message for a long time. Then, for the first time all day, he allowed himself to breathe fully. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more calls, maybe more pressure. But tonight, in the quiet of his clinic, Elijah Carter, doctor, mentor, black man, reflected not on what was taken from him, but what he'd given back. A moment of truth, a lesson in restraint, and proof that sometimes the most powerful protest is simply standing still.